Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to this July 1st, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Our opening story in the news tonight, the funerals of 3 teenagers who were abducted and murdered while hitchhiking in the West Bank of Israel were held today. Addressing thousands of mourners, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described their killers as heinous murderers. Christopher Fraser has our opening story tonight in this video.
For days they've shared the family's torment. An entire nation hoping and praying for the return of 3 teenage boys. Today came the grief. There were thousands who came to mourn. The murders, said the Prime Minister, an attack on each and every one of them. A wide and deep chasm stands between us and our enemies, he said. They sanctify death, and we sanctify life. They sanctify cruelty, we sanctify mercy. The pain is felt most acutely in the neighbourhoods where the boys were known. In the city of El Ad, they surrounded the ambulance carrying the body of 19-year-old Ayal Ifrach, seen here on the left alongside 16-year-old Gilad Sha'er and Naftali Frankel. The boys were kidnapped 3 weeks ago while hitchhiking on their way home from school. They were shot, their bodies dumped in a shallow grave. They are horrors that bring a father to the brink of despair.
It could happen waiting for a bus, it could happen in your house, it could happen driving, it could happen anywhere. It's a problem because no matter where we are, we're Jewish.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be weighing his next move, and he will know that a large pocket of his support who are grieving are demanding a robust response. Doing nothing is not an option. But he'll also know that this collective punishment in the eyes of the Palestinians further undermines President Mahmoud Abbas, and long-term, that does not serve Israel's security concerns.
Overnight, there were 34 airstrikes on the Gaza Strip, stronghold of the militant Hamas movement that Israel holds entirely responsible for the boys' deaths. In Hebron, in the West Bank, the Israelis blew up the homes of the 2 Hamas suspects who they're still hunting. President Abbas has condemned the murders, but he demands evidence that Hamas were involved.
But you cannot sort of use every development like this in order to punish a whole nation, which is what Israel has been doing. If you use that logic, we will be reacting the same way. The month of June alone, 14 Palestinians were killed. In the last 2 weeks, 10 of them were killed, and many of them children, by the Israeli occupation.
But as the funeral took place this evening, a tape was leaked to the media of the last phone call the boys made to a police helpline. "We've been kidnapped," says the voice. It's a recording that will be played over and over again alongside these images. They will stoke the anger and the clamour for Israel to hit back.
And friends, you know, the BBC does an outstanding job of reporting worldwide. They get into some places no other news agencies are able to get into at all. And when they play some of the comments by leaders of the Palestinian organizations, they are attempting to do a balanced report. And for a news organization of this world, again, I salute the BBC. Outstanding work, and they try to be fair. They try to show both sides. And, you know, showing both sides can be valuable to us. When I was a student in the early 70s at Ambassador College in Pasadena, California, Mr. Armstrong would have Palestinian leaders come over and speak to us in the student body at forums and assemblies. And the Palestinian leaders that Mr. Armstrong invited over to speak to us would, of course, give their side or their understanding of the situation, the knowledge they had from their viewpoint. And it was good. Mr. Armstrong felt that it was good for us, and I definitely agree. It was good for us to hear directly from the horses' mouths, from the Palestinians, their viewpoint on the Middle East. And when you get the whole truth, when you get all of the information, some of which is only very recently coming out, even now. I mentioned last night the former Jesuit priest who worked in the Vatican and was able to see secret documents. And he's now reporting on them. Many videos posted on many of the video places like YouTube that reveal what this former Jesuit learned from documents in the Vatican about how, going back to 500, 600 AD, the Vatican was providing assets to the Arabs with a request that they surrendered, that once they kill all the Jews and Christians in Jerusalem, that they turn Jerusalem over to the Vatican in exchange for all the assets the Vatican was giving them to buy weapons and arm the Arabian Palestinian generals and the Palestinian people so they could do this killing of Jews and Christians for and on behalf of the Vatican. But then I also mentioned last night, as the former Jesuit priest brings out, the generals, the Arab generals, were so successful, much more so than anybody thought. Both the Arabs and the Vatican thought they might be. And of course there's more to it, because the Palestinians are a very religious-based people. They understand that they are the offspring of a descendant of Abraham, just as Isaac and the people of Israel, all 12 tribes, are descendants of Abraham. You know, Abraham also had descendants via the son of the Egyptian handmaid Hagar, whose son was named Ishmael, and God promised that the descendants, he promised the mom and Ishmael, that the descendants of Ishmael would become 12 great princes. Now, they wouldn't be numberless, countless, as Isaac's offspring would be, but they'd be 12 great princes. And that's what's happened in the Middle East. We have these 12 great princes. Not princes, but, you know, prince, plural, princes, and the leaders, chiefs in the Middle East. And that's why we see these different tribal influences in the Middle East, because Ishmael's descendants were basically divided up into 12 different groups of people under each chiefdom. And of course now it's divided into more than that, and it's really gotten complicated. And that in part because of the Vatican's doing. The Vatican promoted this idea of Muhammad, and they helped the Arabs write the holy book, quote unquote. You know, even the Roman Empire under the Pope was called the Holy Roman Empire. But does that really reflect the great God of creation? Well, God explains in several places in the Bible. First of all, going to Revelation 12, verse 9, he says that that old serpent, the dragon, Satan the devil, has deceived the whole world. And how did he manage to do that? Another place in the Bible, God says that's because the devil doesn't appear in a red devil suit with a long tail and a pitchfork. Oh, no. He appears, as God tells us in his word, as an angel of light. And I believe we find that explanation, and let me get my bigger print Bible instead of this Dakes with all this fine print and all the wonderful comments that Dake has made in the margins of the Bible. I believe we find that in either 1 Corinthians 4 or 1 Corinthians 10. Maybe it's 1 Corinthians 10, verse 4. Let's see. Okay. No, that's another verse. All right, let's... there's a verse in 1 Corinthians that tells us about, some of you know where this is, and you're probably sitting there saying, Steve, why don't you know right where that is? Well, if I could punch up one of my electronic concordances, I could get right to it. We get spoiled by that today, friends, but there's a verse here where God tells us that, maybe it's Second Corinthians, where God tells us that the devil appears as an angel of light. And to get to that verse, all you got to do is punch up angel of light in a electronic concordance, and boom, it'll take you right to it. And just like a lot of people can't spell today because they got that, we got electronic dictionaries. And let me just see if I can find it real quick here. I think it's in 2 Corinthians 4, maybe. But it's a verse that, if I don't find it here, friends, it's one that tells you that, here it is. It is 2 Corinthians 4, verse 4. In whom the God of this world has blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel, who is the image of gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them. Well, that's another verse actually that supports the fact of what Revelation 12, verse 9 says, that, the God of this world, that's Satan the devil, has blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest otherwise the light of the glorious gospel of Christ should shine unto them. I apologize, I'm not able to just put my finger right on it at the moment, but let me just check 2 Corinthians 10. All right, some of my enemies out there, you may be having a good laugh. Steve can't find that verse. Well, all right, now listen. I'll tell you what I'm going to do, just to let you know we should use tools that are helpful to us, friends, and there is a tool that, let me put something else on the screen while I change my let's see, how am I going to do this? I got to make two changes. I got to change this button, and then I've got an electronic Bible on my computer, and all we have to do is punch in angel of light. I'll do this for you and show you how this works. And then we find in 2 Corinthians 11:14. There we are. Thank you for being patient with me, and thank you for the Father for providing such good tools like an electronic concordance. All right, here, what did I say? 2 Corinthians 11:14. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 14. And let's back up a verse. Verse 13. For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. Transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And, verse 14, no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. He appears as an angel of light. He does not appear as a devil in a red suit with a big tail and a pitchfork. But in our next story, dear friends, the Israel, who is pictured in the Bible, and I'm talking about Israel, the people of Israel who are the tribe of Judah, pictured in the Bible as a great lion. And a lion, you ruffle a lion, you got something really coming at you. And right now, that great lion in the country of Israel in the Middle East is very riled up against Hamas, the militant Palestinian group. It says kidnapped and murdered 3 teenagers in the West Bank of Israel. The bodies of those 3 teenagers were found last night after they had been missing for more than a fortnight. Yolande Nell reports from the roundabout that has become the focal point for protesters.
This is a very busy junction on Route 60 going into the West Bank, and it's very close to here that those 3 young Israelis were last seen alive at a busy hitchhiking spot, which is where they were trying to get a ride home for the weekend after they'd left the seminaries where they were studying Jewish settlements here in the West Bank. Now, it's only 10 minutes drive from here, just on the way to Hebron, that the bodies were found. This grim discovery was made last night in a field next to a Palestinian village. And we have seen here in the past hours hundreds of Israelis gathering, particularly on this roundabout where they lit candles, were waving Israeli flags. And just a sign really of the amount of public pressure that there's going to be on the Israeli government to take decisive action about all of this.
Okay, Yolande, excellent job. All right, caught me catching a sip of water and actually a sip of some maca cappuccino. I made that long drive up to a city, Oaks Bluff, just past Gadsden in Alabama, 111 miles each way, a 222-mile round trip from my home to the burial site where Ray Epperson was buried yesterday and is now in a place of safety for him. Now, that's not the place of safety that God speaks of, that God is preparing in the Middle East in a trilateral area, area near Jordan, that triangulates certain area around Jordan, that is, God is established for his elect during the time of the Great Tribulation. And the next, let me bring this part of the slide I have for you here, friend, forward. The next major event in prophecy is the one just past the first, second, third, fourth seal, which has been active since Jesus Christ's day, but it has been accelerating since Jesus Christ's day. That's the fifth seal, which has not yet happened. Maybe we had a little bit of a type of it during the time that Fox wrote about in Fox's Book of Martyrs, when there was a small martyrdom, and I say small by comparison to what's coming during the time of Jacob's trouble, during the fifth seal, the time of the Great Tribulation, which Jesus Christ described as a time of trouble so great that no time before it, since the beginning of mankind, the beginning of the earth, no trouble has ever been as bad as what's coming, and thankfully, as God says, no time after this time of great tribulation will ever again be as bad. It'll be a time of a huge martyrdom. It'll be the time of the revival of the Holy Roman Empire. It'll be the time when an emperor, most likely an Assyrian, as were the past emperors of the Holy Roman Empire, which will be revived. The Holy Roman Empire will be revived for one last time as the seventh head of that empire is coronated by the Pope in Frankfurt, Germany. And that will kick off the seventh head and the final head of the Holy Roman Empire, which, friends, is pictured in this slide over on the right-hand side, a time of great trouble, but it's a time when God's elect, his first fruit, the people of the spring harvest, are promised, if you continue with a Philadelphia attitude and watch world news and pray about it with all your heart, praying thy kingdom come, and praying for the people who are affected by the things in today's news. God says he will account you worthy to escape this great tribulation pictured by the fifth seal. Now, that's all the time I have to say about that tonight, because I got a story I really want to give you that will explain something to you, and then cover just a couple of more items in news tonight. The leader of the jihadist militant group, ISIS, has called on Muslims to travel to Iraq and Syria to help build an Islamic State. In an audio message, he's called on Muslims to immigrate to the Islamic State, saying it was a duty. ISIS says it is forming an Islamic State or caliphate on the territories, on the territories it controls in Iraq and Syria. Jeremy Brown has this report for us from Baghdad.
Time for a victory lap, ISIS style. Its men showed off war booty, including American equipment abandoned by the Iraqi army. ISIS is joining the wars in Syria and Iraq together. It filmed these pictures in Raqqa, the stronghold in Syria that was its base for the attack into Iraq. Its leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, urged Muslims to join the Islamic Caliphate he's declared in Syria and Iraq.
Rush because Syria is not for the Syrians and Iraq is not for the Iraqis. The earth is Allah's. The state is a state for all Muslims. The land is for the Muslims, all Muslims.
The divisions in Iraq get wider. In the north, the Kurds increased their territory by 40% as the Iraqi army collapsed. Now they're putting up border posts, and their leader is calling for an independence referendum within months.
Of course, we'll help all our Arab and Sunni brothers to get out of this crisis. But that doesn't mean that we will abandon our goal and our basic project, which is the independence of Kurdistan.
In Baghdad, the new Iraqi parliament met. Iraq's three main groups, Shias, Sunni Arabs and Kurds, need to agree a political future if Iraq is to survive. Other parliaments are just as rowdy, but many MPs here are backed by militias. They adjourned when Sunnis and Kurds walked out. The Shia-dominated government unveiled jets bought second-hand from Russia. Iraq needs wisdom, not more weapons, according to an exiled Sunni leader.
I think how many thousands of tons of ammunition being used in my country since 1991. The result? Broken up country. The social fabric has been destroyed. Death and destruction. This is the result of using military means over years.
Small corners of normality created in recent years are being squeezed out by war. Not many people wanted to risk watching the World Cup at this restaurant, just across the River Tigris from the government's heavily protected zone. On the other side of the river, behind their concrete barriers, Iraqi parliamentarians have to take some decisions. The last government took the best part of 10 months to form. Right now, they don't have that sort of time to spare. Too much is happening on the ground too quickly. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Baghdad.
Jeremy Bowen, we appreciate your braveness and your traveling here and there to be on top of some of the most important and significant stories happening in the world today. Jeremy Bowen of the BBC. Friends, fighting continues in Iraq where Sunni militants, the Islamic State in the Levant, ISIS, have announced the creation of a caliphate. But what does that mean? What do the jihadists want? The BBC explains in 60 seconds in this very special video. And friends, I'm going to keep my mic on. I don't have a license just to play the music that goes with this video, so let me just read the slides to you because sometimes they go by a little fast. Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant. ISIS jihadists have declared a caliphate, an Islamic State ruled by one leader. They want to enforce their view of conservative Islamic traditions. The caliphate covers ISIS-controlled areas in northern Syria and western Iraq, including Mosul, Fallujah, Tal Afar. Leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is now Caliph Ibrahim. Notice the similarity there, friends, of his name to a bomb, Abraham. Caliph Ibrahim. caliphs are seen as political successors to the Prophet Muhammad, which again the Vatican helped to create. Baghdadi's men use social media to spread fear, with jihadists sharing gruesome images. ISIS has up to 10,000 fighters known for their brutality. The group has assets worth up to $2 billion and weapons from bases it has overrun. And that's the little special video that we have for you there. Okay. Now, friends, I have we're going to go over about 10 minutes tonight. And in those 10 minutes, I have a very, very special report for you that I'm going to be reading that goes back to December 2013, asking this question: why border lines drawn with a ruler in World War I, during World War I, still rock the Middle East? This is an article by Tarek Osman that's part of a program he did entitled The Making of the Modern Arab World. And friends, I apologize for the belch earlier. I think some of that maca drink I've been drinking today to help me stay awake after a long trip yesterday. It caused me I got back late, and to get our report on last night, I was up till maybe 2:30 a.m. this morning, then had to be up this morning to take care of regular chores and duties, plus get tonight's show ready. And I've been drinking that maca to help me stay awake. And especially I can't run the air conditioner while we do the live stream because the vents just pour the hissing sound right into the microphone. So I just have to run with the hot lights and hope for the best in here. But anyway, in Europe, if you're watching from Europe, after a good meal, if you don't belch, it's considered an insult anyway, So a belch should not be offensive to people unless you do it right into a microphone. But what I have for you tonight, friends, could, in the next 5-10 minutes, could help you very much understand why the mess in Iraq got to the explosive level it has. It actually was made more complex since World War I, more complex than it already was with what the Vatican did and trying to create and trying to get Jerusalem to itself with the help of the Arabs, by the Vatican helping create a false religion and a false holy book, the Quran. I know that makes a lot of you Arabs really love me. I'm going to say this in behalf of the Arabs, though. I've heard some of our own brethren of my own church meaning not any one little group offshoot or anything, but I'm talking about the people of God, whom God has called, since he rose up Mr. Herbert Armstrong, to call and elect and build them into a beautiful, fitly framed temple as a bride for Jesus Christ. I've heard some members, or at least some among us, make complaints that when Mr. Armstrong would go visit the Arab world, who refer to God as Allah, Allah is not really God. Well, friends, Allah to the Arabs is as much God as the God that the professing Christians of the United States or the UK or anywhere else around the world profess to worship. Those who profess to be Christians, who worship God and observe as a day under the fourth command to keep holy the first day of the week, which is really worship to the sun god Baal. They do not know the true God, and so when they refer to God, they're referring to a God they don't know. And what's the difference in a professing Christian making reference to the God of creation as God, but not the true God, because they worship him, a God they don't know. They don't understand when he said, the seventh day of the week is the Sabbath. I made it. I'm saying, remember the Sabbath day, the seventh day of the week, to keep it holy. So those who profess God as part of a professing Christian world, that God is no more, how do you say, that God is no less or no more a God than Allah. I mean, Allah would be equal to that God that the professing Christians claim to worship. I say claim to worship because if you don't, Jesus Christ said, I call you my friends because you do what I say do, because you obey. To Jesus Christ, that's a friend. And to God the Father, those who obey, those are his true Christians. If you don't obey, you're not a true Christian. And those who, but that's not to put down people over much, because God has, like some of the verses we just read, God has blinded the minds of most men. And for good reason. He's not going to call all the rest of men until later, when Satan is put away. Those who are called later will not have to overcome Satan. There's a certain blessing in that for some people. God has called the weak of this world, who he can deal with, who will humble themselves and submit themselves to him now, while Satan is still the God of this world, still on the throne of this earth. And all right, now, unless I have to take us even longer overtime tonight, I mean, by overtime, friends, I just normally set a general half hour for the program, but some nights things are important and I go a little longer. Tonight's one of those nights. Excuse me. And friends, on the screen right now, this is the original secret Sykes-Picot map of 1916. That was, World War I started in 1914, ended in 1918, and the treaty that ended it followed in 1919. And where you can see, I hope you can make that out okay, there's an A at the top part of that map, and then below a line that's been drawn almost in a straight line like a ruler. It's labeled B below that line. A would go to France, B to Britain. This map is marked with a crude chinographical pencil, it was done in the second decade of the 20th century. It shows the ambition and folly of the 100-year-old British-French plan that helped create the modern-day Middle East. Straight lines mark uncomplicated borders. However, it sometimes creates problems, as you'll hear in this report. Most probably, that straight line was the reason why most of the lines that Mark Sykes, representing the British government, and Francois-Georges Picot from the French government, agreed upon in 1916 were straight ones. Sykes and Picot were quintessential empire men. Both were aristocrats seasoned in colonial administration, and crucially believers in the notion that the people of the region would be better off under the European empires. Both men also had intimate knowledge of the Middle East. The key tenets of the agreement they had negotiated in relative haste amidst the turmoil of World War I continues to influence the region to this day. But while Sykes-Picot's straight lines had proved significantly helpful to Britain and France in the first half of the 20th century, their impact on the region's peoples was quite different. The map that the two men drew divided the land that had been under Ottoman rule since the early 16th century into new countries and regulated these political entities to two spheres of influence: Iraq, Transjordan, and Palestine under British influence. Now let me bring up another map that shows the influence as I tell you about this. First, though, let me just go quickly to a picture of Mark Sykes, who said to the king at the time when this was being proposed, he said, or to the prime minister, he said, "I should like to draw a line from," you know, friend, I'm sorry, my memory, did they have a prime minister in World War I? He said to whoever the leader was at that time, he said, "I should like to draw a line," that he had to report to, "I should like to draw a line from the E in AcrE to the last K in KirkuK." And you'll see in that map that we had on the screen, that's he was given permission to do that, and that's what they did. And then that resulted in the influence that's pictured in this map that I'll tell you about now. That Iraq, Transjordan, and Palestine were under the British influence, Syria and Lebanon under French influence. The two men, Sykes and Picot, were not mandated to redraw the borders of the Arab countries in North Africa, but the division of influence existed there as well, with Egypt under British rule and France controlling the Maghreb. Now, here are the details that relate to this slide that we just had up. At a meeting in Downing Street, Mark Sykes pointed to a map and told the Prime Minister, "I should like to draw a line from the E in AcrE to the last K in KirkuK." And then that resulted in, as we just had on the screen, this map of influence. But there were three problems with the geopolitical order that emerged from the Sykes-Picot agreement. First, it was secret, without any Arabic knowledge, and it negated the main promise that Britain had made to the Arabs in the 1910s, that if they rebelled against the Ottomans, if the Arabs rebelled against the Ottomans, the fall of that empire would bring the Arabs independence. When that independence did not materialize after World War I, and as these colonial powers in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s continued to exert immense influence over the Arab world, the thrust of Arab politics in North Africa and in the Eastern Mediterranean gradually but decisively shifted from building liberal constitutional government systems, as Egypt, Syria, and Iraq had witnessed in the early decades of the 20th century, to assertive nationalism, whose main objective was getting rid of the colonialist and the ruling systems that worked with them. This was a key factor behind the rise of the militarist regimes that had come to dominate many Arab countries from the 1950s until the 2011 Arab uprisings. The second problem lay in the tendency to draw straight lines. Sykes-Picot intended to divide the Levant on a sectarian basis. Lebanon was envisioned as a haven for Christians, especially Maronites and Druze. Palestine, with a sizable Jewish community, the Bekaa Valley on the border between the two countries, effectively left to Shia Muslims. Syria, with the region's largest sectarian demographic, Sunni Muslims. And friends, let me see if I have another slide that relates. Now, I'll tell you in a moment. For the period from the end of the Crusades, and by the way, you know, that former Jesuit I mentioned to you a moment ago, the Crusades, one of the main reasons for the Crusades around 1100 AD, actually a little bit after 1000 AD, was because of the Arabs, generals and the Arabs there. They had become so successful in killing the Jews and killing the Christians in Jerusalem, and then they built their Dome of the Rock and said, no, Pope, sorry, we're not giving you Jerusalem. We're building a dome there and making that what was believed to be the Temple Mount area, and the place where Abraham sacrificed one of his sons, which the Arabs were led incorrectly to believe was Ishmael through the Quran that the Vatican helped put together and write, when it was really, according to God's Word, the Holy Bible, it was Isaac who God told Abram to take up to the mountain and sacrifice. But then God, when he saw Abraham was willing to obey God faithfully, right to the point of just before he would have slashed Isaac's throat as a sacrifice, God said, "Hold it, Abraham. Now I know that you will obey me fully." Oh, friends, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to peg. I accidentally hit that knob and knocked the volume way, way up. I'm sorry. Hopefully this will bring it back where it should be. God said, "Hold it, Abraham. I've got a ram over in the bush. Use this ram instead of your son for this sacrifice." That's the way the Holy Bible tells it truthfully. But you see, you've got this Quran teaching all these Arabs that it was Isaac whom God had Abraham take up to offer as a sacrifice, and who then received the promise of all that land. So you got these people believing religiously that the land was given to them by God, and here they had the help of the Vatican to buy them weapons and be able to kill the Jews and kill professing Christians in the area and take Jerusalem, build the Dome of the Rock over that temple. And the Pope didn't get Jerusalem like he intended when he gave them weapons to the Arabs. And so the Vatican is angry now. They didn't get what they wanted out of this deal. So the Crusades went after these Arabs. And yeah, for a while they took the Middle East and Jerusalem, but it didn't last. The Crusades, let's see, where was I in this report? For the period from the end of the Crusades up until the arrival of the European powers in the 19th century, I was giving you a list of things that related to the geography over there. And despite the region's vibrant trading culture, the different sects effectively lived separately from each other. But the thinking behind Sykes-Picot did not translate into practice. That meant the newly created borders did not correspond to the actual sectarian, tribal, or ethnic distinctions on the ground. These differences were buried first under the Arabs' struggle to eject the European powers, and later by the sweeping wave of Arab nationalism. Continuing this article, friends, in the period from the late 1950s to the late 1970s, and especially during the heydays of Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, from the Suez Crisis in 1956 to the end of the 1960s, Arab nationalism gave immense momentum to the idea that a united Arab world would dilute the socio-demographic differences between the populations. In the 1980s and 1990s, the Arab world's strongmen, for example, Hafez Assad and Saddam Hussein in the Levant, and Colonel Muammar Gaddafi in North Africa, suppressed the differences, often using immense brutality. But the tensions and aspirations that these differences gave rise to neither disappeared nor diluted. When cracks started to appear in these countries, first by the gradual disappearance of these strongmen, later by several Arab republics gradually becoming hereditary fiefdoms controlled by small groups of economic interest, and most recently after the 2011 uprisings, the old frictions, frustrations, and hopes that had been concealed for decades came to the fore. The third problem was that the state system that was created after World War I had exacerbated the Arabs' failure to address the crucial dilemma they have faced over the past century and a half, the identity struggle between, on one hand, nationalism and secularism on the one hand, and on the other hand, Islamism, and in some cases, Christianism. Now, here's where this next photograph will come into our story here, friends. The founders of the Arab liberal age from the late 19th century to the 1940s created state institutions. For example, a secular constitution in Tunisia in 1861. We'll come back to this photograph in a moment, full screen. And the beginnings of a liberal democracy in Egypt in the interwar period, and put forward a narrative that many social groups, especially in the middle classes, supported, but failed to weave the piousness, conservatism, and religious frame of reference of their societies into the ambitious social modernization they had led. Friends, I'm reading to you from an article. We're almost to the conclusion of it. I hope you'll pay as careful attention as you can, as well as I'm able to read it to you under these hot lights. Despite major advancements in industrialization, the dramatic inequity between the upper middle classes and the vast majority of the populations continued. The strong men of Arab nationalism championed, with immense popular support, a different socialist and at times militarist narrative, but at the expense of civil and political freedoms. And for the past 4 decades, the Arab world has lacked any national project or serious attempt at confronting the contradictions in the social fabric. Now we get to a new generation. That state structure was poised for explosion, and the changing demographics proved to be the trigger. Over the past 4 decades, the Arab world has doubled its population to over 330 million people. 2/3 of them are under 35 years old. And then this next photograph of the signatures of Francois-Georges Picot and Mark Sykes on the original map, which is now held by the National Archives, relates to the rest of our story. This new generation, this is a generation that has inherited acute socio-economic and political problems that it did not contribute to, and yet has been living in the consequences of, from education quality, job availability, economic prospects, to the perception of the future. At core, The wave of Arab uprisings that commenced in 2011 is the generation's attempt at changing the consequences of the state order that began in the aftermath of World War I with what happened on this map. This currently unfolding transformation entails the promises of a new generation searching for a better future and the peril of a wave of chaos that could engulf the region for several years. The making of the Arab world presented by Tariq Osman, the article I've been reading to you from, friends, can be found on BBC Radio 4 website. The writer is the author of Egypt on the Brink. And friends, that's it for our report tonight on this Tuesday evening, July 1st, 2014. God willing, and the Creek will be back again tomorrow evening, Wednesday night, with the days. And by the way, friends, tomorrow night I will continue a story from on this same theme that we were on tonight, with a story from June 2013, almost a year, well, just a little more than a year ago, that sheds even more light on the current history of the Middle East Islamic State in the making. News from 1 year ago, a little more than a year ago, that the superpowers would have been heeding and paying attention to if they had, and doing something about, would be wise. If the leaders of the superpowers had the wisdom, which it seems if God doesn't give it, men just won't even try to understand, that they could learn from history, and men could be guided and led by their Creator if, the big if men would honor and submit to the great and loving Creator God. Blessings and cursings, Deuteronomy 28, Leviticus 26. Be good to review. When men obey, they're blessed. When they don't obey, just the opposite of blessings, cursing. And that applies both individually and collectively to the individuals of a nation. I'll make you the head, not the tail, the lender, not the borrower. One of you will chase many of your enemy agriculturally. I'll give you the rains to grow your crops and to feed your cattle. I'll protect you from national disasters. That's just the top of the iceberg. But the opposite of that, if you disobey your Creator, friends, in those 2 chapters, God says, I'll make you the tail, not the head. I'll make you the borrower, not the lender. Your agriculture, I'll cut off your rain. I'll cause it to flood when you get too much water in some places, and that causes problems. I'll allow all kind of natural disasters to overwhelm you without stopping them with the protection I have been giving a people blessed, who are blessed. Your enemies, one of them will chase many of you, and I'll take away the pride of your power, as God says in Leviticus 26 and verse 19, a good verse to review. Well, friends, I'm starting to wrap up, and I better do that. We'll pick up again, God willing, tomorrow night, Wednesday night, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy right here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host Stephen Lloyd saying, good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the COGTV.org video archive.